So this webinar is CPE eligible. It is available only for this session, but you need to be here for the full 50 minutes. And you must complete the polling questions. So when they pop up, you'll respond. That's how we know that you're still there. And then Insightful Accountant will automatically send you your CPE certificate after the session is complete. By way of housekeeping, that's all I got. So I'm going to introduce Andrew. Andrew Wall is a CPA and CMA with over 19 years in accounting and IT development. Is managing partner at CPA4IT.ca in Canada. And it's a cloud-based accounting firm focused on helping small businesses. Andrew is a global thought leader, and he's recognized as a top 100 accounting influencer. Andrew, do you then want to talk a little bit about Wes, and I'm going to work on getting him in here for us?
Sure. So Wes began his career with Right Size Solutions in 2002 because wealth management firms needed a technology partner who really understood their needs. 20 years later, he remains committed to understanding every nuance of his clients' businesses. He is a technology pioneer in every sense. Wes is regularly quoted as a subject matter expert in the industry publications and speaks to small and large groups on topics such as cybersecurity, cloud-based environments, and leveraging technology. And I got the opportunity to meet Wes down at the Accounting Web conference in San Diego, where he was doing a panel with Liz Scott, and great session. He definitely has a wealth of knowledge. So fingers crossed, we're going to be able to get him in.
We're going to get him in here. And I also saw that session. I know he's great. You guys are going to love him. I'm working on it, I promise. But Andrew, if you want to get started, and then I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to continue to work on getting Wes in here.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll kick us off and starting with a little bit about what the agenda is for the day. So we want to start by looking at the current threats and emerging cyber crimes that can potentially leave your firm vulnerable. Then we're going to move on to the critical security steps that you should know to sort of stem the flow of cyber threats. And then the stack of software that you need to secure your data well, as we're calling it. Then what to consider when purchasing cyber insurance, which is an important aspect for protecting that cyber or that data well. And then lastly, the often overlooked blind spot in your firm's data flow and how you can mitigate the related risks. So we're going to give Wes a few moments, but while we're waiting for Wes to get in, I'm going to jump right into our first checkpoint, checkpoint number one, which is the current threats and emerging cybercrime, if I go the right direction. So, first of all, I want to maybe start with what's driven me to speak so much on this topic. I am an accounting firm owner, have a practice up here in Canada. I come from a technology background myself. And I thought we were well-versed and well-covered in technology because we were using Citrix terminal services and we had a fairly sophisticated stack. And I found out the hard way that we weren't quite as prepared for the modern cyber criminals as we thought we were. And we went through a ransomware attack, and it was one of the most stressful periods of my life. And the reality is that right now, the amount of attacks in cybercrime has gone up 600% year over year. And as a result of the pandemic and more firms moving to work from home and more people moving to cloud-based technologies and just the flow of data increasing, so too has cybercrime. And there's some pretty crazy statistics out there. So according to the Mimecast 2021 State of Email Security Report, 96% of companies have been the target of an email-related phishing attempt. And when faced with a ransomware attack, 64% of the companies paid that ransom, yet nearly 4 out of 10 of those firms failed to recover the data. And there's absolutely no shortage of breaches and cyber attacks that are taking place. And in 2022 alone, we've got some major cases, including Crypto.com, Microsoft, News Corp, Red Cross, Ronin, FlexBooker, GiveSendGo, Cash App, and many, many others. And while those sort of high-profile cases certainly grab the headlines and demonstrate that no one is safe. The Verizon data breach investigation report tells us that 43% of the cyber attacks are actually aimed at small businesses, and that about 60% of those small businesses that are hacked go out of business within 6 months. So these are some pretty scary statistics, and it makes me really want to make sure that everyone in our community is educated and understands what the risks are, what they can do to mitigate those risks. And I want to do it in a way that it's not intended to scare you. And I don't want you to be afraid of cybersecurity and feel like you have to bury your head in the sand. And I also don't want you to feel like you need to become a cybersecurity expert. I think that with the right partners in place and the right pieces of technology, your business can run along smoothly. But it is important to be well versed and be prepared, because the analogy I often use as a Canadian, we have a lot of bears up here. And so my favorite analogy is a bear attack. And I like to think of protecting your firm like being in a bear attack. And the objective here isn't necessarily to outrun the bear, it's to outrun the guy beside you. And I think if you wrap your business in enough layers of protection, you are a less attractive target to the cyber criminals than those firms who aren't taking cybersecurity seriously. And I think a lot of people right now think either, it's the responsibility of the third-party vendors, they're in the cloud, I don't need to worry about it, I don't need to manage it, or they're just burying their head in the sand thinking that everything's okay. And there are some very, very real risks and some very, very scary statistics out there. To give you some other scary stats out there, 47% of small businesses had at least one cyber attack in the past year, and 44% of those had 2 to 4 attacks. And the reality is that once you undergo one attack, you're also prone to potential others, and particularly if you pay the ransom. I know a couple of firms that when we went through our attack, thankfully, our data wasn't able to be encrypted and we were able to not have to pay the ransom, which goes a long way for the cyber criminals not recognizing you as a juicy lead, so to speak. But I had other friends who I talked to, large business owners, who had cybersecurity insurance. Their cybersecurity insurance did cover the ransom. It was paid out. They got their data back, but within 6 months, they were hacked again. And the reality is, once these cyber criminals recognize that you are a potential candidate, and particularly a candidate that will pay, they're likely to target you again. But let's jump on to our next slide. And Cal, you'll let me know if Wes does ever jump in here, correct?
Of course. Yes, I will.
Awesome. I really do hope that we can get him in, because he's got a wealth of knowledge here on.
We're very close. I promise.
We're very close. So what's interesting when we look at data breaches is the cost of a data breach. And the data breaches, I think what's really interesting. So first of all, let's look at what the average cost of a data breach worldwide. So the average cost of a data breach based on, this is 2019 data, was $3.2 million as the average cost of a data breach. Now, these are obviously taking into account those large organizations. But I think what's also interesting is that it normally takes organizations on average 191 days to identify these data breaches. And I think what's the most interesting to me is that there are a lot of unknown and hidden costs in a data breach. Obviously, people recognize the IT costs of having to, if you're breached and you have to, rebuild your system if it got encrypted, and all those typical IT costs that you might expect to see when it comes into a data breach. And of course, the outage time, if you're, lost opportunities for your businesses, I think people recognize that. But a lot of the costs that people don't appreciate or expect are the legal costs that you're going to have, because if you do go through a data breach, even if none of your information is encrypted, then you have to report not only to your clients, but to the governing bodies And so typically that involves working with lawyers who specialize in this. So you're going to have some legal costs. You're going to have some remuneration costs to your customers. At the very least, you're going to want to provide some form of um, um, black or dark web monitoring, as well as credit monitoring, just to make sure that personal identifiable data wasn't actually used in any nefarious ways. So it can be quite costly. And I mean, I guess what's not surprising is where the root causes of these data breaches tend to come from. So at number one spot, at 48%, is negligent employee or contractor. And this comes down to some of the things we're going to dive into deeper later, which are things like password hygiene. The amount of times that people reuse the same password, even after those passwords have been breached and have been known to have been breached, is quite scary. The amount of people that will use those really simple, basic passwords, like in the man from Toronto, password was the password. But believe it or not, that's one of the most popular passwords used, as is 1234556, and slight variations thereof. Of course, there's what's interesting to me is coming in at number 2, third-party mistakes, 41%. And this is, a lot of us are relying on our third parties, but don't actually have any understanding of what those third parties are doing or how they're managing their security and infrastructure. And then the third on the list is external hacker attacks at 27%. And then we've got little things like malicious insiders and others, and some other areas that people are reaching into our systems and doing things that they shouldn't. But the most recent study that we pulled this data from found that 63% of the successful attacks did actually come from internal sources. And that's either through the errors that we talked about, either up above, either through control errors or through intentional fraud. And then the other biggest chunk that we saw, with 33% of that coming or involving at least social engineering, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And social engineering in cybersecurity is that sort of psychological manipulation of people into either performing or divulging confidential information. And candidates for social engineering can range from either the executives down to the lowest level person in the organization. But particularly in accounting and finance, we want to look and pay close attention to our AP departments. I was down at another conference, Scaling New Heights, just recently, where I had dinner with a friend who had told me that they had gone through a phishing attack that resulted in them paying $18,000 fraudulently to someone who had spearphished one of the bookkeeping members of that person's organization. And the most important thing when it comes to social engineering is, first of all, understanding how sophisticated these attacks have become. They're very, very highly targeted. And you'd be surprised at how accurate and how good they are with these. But the key is education and training your team members on what to look out for and what types of behavior fall outside of the norm. And of course, having your own cyber policies within your organization on, what's the approval process for a $5 bill, a $50 bill, a $500 bill, a $5,000 bill, and obviously understanding when things are outside of the norm. But the reality is, as I said, we got some more scary stats here, with 98% of the cyber attacks relying on social engineering right now. And 43% of IT professionals have said that they've been targeted themselves by social engineering schemes in the last year. And as it comes down to this training over and over again, and people who are not familiar with the processes and the way people act, new employees are going to be the most susceptible to socially engineered attacks, with 60% of IT professionals citing recent hires as being the highest risk within the organization. And now this is another interesting stat that we pulled out of here, is that 21% of current or former employees have used social engineering to gain a financial advantage for revenge out of either simple curiosity or for fun. That's pretty scary. And specifically, social engineering attempts have spiked more than 500% year over year. And when we look at the number of breach incidents by type, they break down to 65% are identity theft, 17% are account access, 13% are financial access, 4% are nuisance, and then 1% are existential data. Now, I guess that brings us to our very first poll in the organization, or in the session. Sorry, so
okay, I'm going to launch the poll now. So the poll question is, have you ever been, or do you know of anyone who has been the victim of a cyber attack? And we're going to give you guys about a minute to answer so that everyone can come in and we make sure that you're still there, so to speak.
Yep, make sure you get that PD. And I'm curious to see, because, you know,
There he was.
Yeah, what I'm really curious to see, though, is how people answer this, because this is a bit of a trick question too, isn't it? Right? Have you, or has anyone you've known been the victim of a cyber attack? Because there's so many people who are afraid to answer this question honestly, and then there's so many people who will do the best to answer this question, not realizing that they've actually been the victim of a cyber attack. And again, I'm thankful to have some of the platforms that we have, like Friday Night Live, where I've had other people who have been willing to come forward, like Kinga, who shared her story. You know, I've had that story where Brad Smith's mother was the victim of attack, where they were trying to reach out to me, pretending to be Brad Smith's mother. So spoofing is quite a common thing. And, you know, the reality is you might have actually been the victim without actually even realizing it, just by someone spoofing or pretending to be you, and then potentially reaching out to your customers and saying, hey, I'm your accountant, you need to pay this bill, pay it now.
It's so scary when that happens, honestly.
It is really, really quite scary. And again,
so I'm gonna hold on, I'm gonna stop you real quick so I can take the poll down.
Mhm.
And then we can get the results. So I'm sharing the results with everybody. So it looks like we're pretty spread out. 35% said yes, 41% said no, and 24% said not that I know of, which is probably the right answer, because likely somebody has been, you may not realize it.
Yes, exactly. I love that at least we've got this many people wanting to say, yeah, they have been the victim of a cyber attack. And that can be anything ranging from, you know, people spamming your web forms, right? Which is something I can tell you we're fighting with right now, and because we are, hey, we've got Wes, woohoo!
Yes,
We've
we do.
had, yeah, we'll get Wes. We'll give you a second to get settled. We appreciate your patience in fighting through the technology woes of getting registered for this session. But I think anyone who's on this call who's from our industry has dealt with technology woes, so we can appreciate that. But you let us know when you're here and good to go. And we just ran our first poll and we've gone through our first checkpoint. And we're just about to check into checkpoint number 2, which is those often overlooked blind spots within your firm. And so maybe we'll do a mic test. Is your audio up? Are you good?
I think so. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great. And I'm excited to chat with you because, as I said earlier, before you logged in, I had the opportunity to meet you very briefly down in San Diego, where you did a great session with Liz Scott. And I know you're just an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I know you're only 21 years old, yet you've got years of experience in the industry.
All that gray hair helps, right? Yeah.
Well, and that gray hair helps, particularly in this industry where It's, when we talk about looking at and understanding the blind spots in our organization, we don't know what we don't know as business owners, right? And I think having the wealth of experience that you do, and having seen the areas where people might have weaknesses gives you a great advantage into helping other people who are maybe new to this. And I know that really, awareness is the key to limiting risk. And within that, I think one of the things that I know that we um, had done before in the past, which was problematic, is, we had given almost full access to every employee in our organization across all our files and everything, not really thinking or recognizing the risk of that. Because I think one of the things that we had always assumed was hacks were, brute force attacks on the system where, no, and we hadn't thought through, well, what happens when someone comes in with a legitimate user ID and password and gets into our system. We hadn't thought through the fact that when you mitigate the amount of access that employees have, you mitigate your risk, because every piece of personal identifiable data that a employee has access to is effectively a cost that if that password is leaked or breached, that you are potentially on the hook for. But I'd be curious to hear from you, outside of, the things that might be common, like, limiting access, minimizing who and how you store personal identifiable information, and, limiting what you share on social media. Have you ever seen other points or where people should, focus their attention on that they may not be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, you're right. A lot of people do overlook this fact, right? One of the key pieces that you're talking about is access, limiting, minimizing the footprint that might be exposed, right, per individual. But I will say this, for many companies, especially the smaller, everyone kind of does everything. So, narrowing that footprint is actually very difficult, for smaller firms, just because every resource needs to, get in there and get engaged and wear a lot of different hats. So, but I will say this, minimizing admin users on individual machines is absolutely critical, right? And a lot of people don't think about that. So a couple of suggestions that I'll throw out for everybody is that when you first log onto your machine, whether you know it or not, you buy a brand new one. When you get that first user in there, it's going to be an administrator on that machine.
Right.
And most of the malware, especially the malware that's going to do the most damage in terms of trying to steal information and get credential access, has to be run under a user that is an admin. So if you function most of the time as a normal user on your PCs and have that admin account available to you when you need to install a printer or software or whatever, simply running that app as an admin lets you do all of those things and use that second user ID to do your administrative functions on the machine. It will minimize the risk that malware is actually going to hit and then start collecting and getting into these accounts. So I would strongly suggest that. And then secondly, I think you really need to be aware of that access itself, protecting access into SaaS-based, web-based, cloud-based applications is really the first step that you need to do to make sure you're minimizing what might be exposed.
Right. What about like home networks and public Wi-Fi's and all those areas too? Because I think one of the things that I've heard is a big access point that people don't usually think about is their wireless printer I've heard those can be pretty vulnerable points in people's home Wi-Fi networks.
Yes, they can. Well, first of all, your home Wi-Fi network probably is your
Weak
most
point.
vulnerable point, right? It's funny. I helped a friend of ours, neighbor at home. They're trying to get a student that was in their home access to Wi-Fi, and they said, I don't know, I can't make this work. And I walked over and I said, well, you haven't changed your password on your home router.
Oh, geez.
It's just default. And they're like, yeah, so
No, everyone knows the passwords for Netgear and for Linksys, like they're publicly posted. You can get those.
Yeah. And the comment was, well, who's gonna be able to get into that? And I said, well, I just did. Right. So, Andrew, like you said, those are very common things. So change your Wi-Fi password in your home. That Wi-Fi printer, folks, you have to understand, anything on a network in today's world is not a dumb device.
No.
Right. So printers, phones, whatever it might be, they are computers. And as such means that's an access point to watch and see anything coming across that network. So just make sure you're using secure HTTPS, right, when you go to your site, so it's somewhat encrypted. But change those passwords. I don't like using Wi-Fi on printers, but if you're going to use it, make sure that you've protected the Wi-Fi password as much as you can. VPNs, if you don't mind, flip back to that for a minute. I thought that was an interesting comment. I'd be curious. I wish we were in a live audience, how many people actually use VPNs.
Wes, you can ask them to raise their hands. There's a button at the bottom. If you're using a VPN, can you guys use the raise hand button to let Wes know?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Can I raise my hand?
Yeah, raise it.
Including Andrew, we have 4.
We have 4. So using a VPN is a good thing, but I'm not in favor of a lot of public VPNs. I only do that as a last resort. So it should be something that your company produces through,
like a Citrix gateway or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. But in place of the VPN, you can always use your hotspot on your phone, or use a true hotspot. In essence, those are VPNs. So those are good to use as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you back up, Andrew.
No, it's all right. I was just going to say, you brought up a point that made me want to jump to the next slide, because we talk about IoT, the Internet of Things, and now everything is a smart device, and people are making their homes smart. And I was watching a YouTube thing where they were talking about actually basically every single smart home device you've added to your network is just a new intrusion point into your wireless network. And it can be quite scary from a cybersecurity perspective, the growing volume of access points into people's networks, home networks and business networks alike. But I think one of the things that I know was our saving grace when we went through our hack was our EDR, CrowdStrike. And I think some people aren't familiar with necessarily what an EDR is, or the difference between EDR and AV or antivirus. So EDR is endpoint discovery and response, and antivirus is what people are used to. And I guess, like in my layman's understanding of the difference between the two, is that antivirus effectively relies on a list or a database of known vulnerabilities, whereas EDR is more AI based, that's actually looking at behavior and actions and looking at how things are interacting with your network and going, wait a minute, this doesn't look consistent with the normal behavior that I'm expecting. Let me quarantine this file that's trying to do something it absolutely shouldn't.
Yeah.
Is that basically the fundamental difference? Am I close? Am I right?
Yeah. No, you are right. We're a big fan of CrowdStrike as well. We think of it as this: antivirus depends on signatures, right? Looking at, so signature meaning exactly what Andrew said, kind of a list of things that are constantly updated. CrowdStrike EDR is not updated constantly because it doesn't need to be. it's looking for the patterns of an attack. So a lot of people think, oh my God, I clicked on that button and now I'm going to get infected. Well, it doesn't happen exactly like that, right? You click on the bad button and there is a series of programs and activity that have to occur to set up to get to things like ransomware or programs that are key loggers, those types of things. Those are the patterns. And that goes back again to what I mentioned. If you're not running as an administrator, it's very difficult to install that software. But if you are, something like CrowdStrike EDR looks at those patterns of what's going on and can actually stop those patterns, right? So we're a big fan of that. So yes, you're 100% spot on. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I love your comment. Don't wait to update. I love that.
Well, patching, it's another big risk, right? We thankfully, I think those people who are smart enough to work with an MSP know, because you have regular patching cycles and you go through that. But I can tell you, prior to working with a provider, we weren't patching on a regular basis.
Right.
And that's, one of the biggest known vulnerabilities. And I can tell you where we run into issues is we don't necessarily, our WordPress site, which isn't managed by our MSP, you got to do little updates for that all the time too, for all the plugins. We've had our website hacked because we weren't updating our plugins. It's the exact
Right.
same thing. You got to update the things, because as soon as someone knows about a vulnerability, that information is shared on the dark web with all the other hackers. And then next thing you know, you're under attack.
Yeah, actually, it isn't just shared. You can actually buy it.
Yes, yeah, that's the hacking as a service now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hacking as a service. It's actually a $1 billion plus business, and it is a business. I mean, they have a variety. Believe it or not, you can not only buy it, but they'll actually run it for you, and they'll take a percentage of whatever they can ransom out. Believe it or not.
Yeah,
So it's pretty sophisticated business.
It is, and it's scary. But that does bring us to our next point in the conversation, our next poll in the conversation. So Kelly, you want to pop up the poll for us and figure out from the people attending, what do you think is the most common point of access for cyber criminals? And Wes, while they're running this poll, it was interesting. One of the stats I shared before you joined us was that on average, it takes 191 days for people to identify that a hacker has breached their system.
Actually, it takes a couple hundred. IBM published a very interesting article, and it was a couple hundred days that on some of the larger hacks that the bad actors have actually sat in the system without doing much, just watching and learning for a couple hundred days before they actually took action.
Wow.
So pretty scary stuff.
Absolutely.
So we have about 15 more seconds. I'm going to leave the poll up. And again, this is, part of how you guys get your CP certificates.
Make sure you complete those. We want you getting all your PD.
Yeah, we got about 16 people so far. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here are your results.
So phishing email. Now, I might have biased this with some of the data I shared earlier. But I mean, Wes, we had some pretty scary stats that are showing something like 98% of attacks are coming through phishing these days. And so I think phishing, but the thing is, I guess the part of this is, it is a bit of a trick question, isn't it? Because they all work together, don't they? They're using social media to do some social engineering to execute a phishing attack to get access to your public, through public Wi-Fi on your outdated operating systems, right? So it's kind of all the above, isn't it?
Well, it is. And what's interesting is phishing email works because of social engineering. Social engineering only works because they've gathered a lot of information about you, your family, your coworkers, your place of work. So it isn't just, some random email anymore that you get. They are sophisticated emails that know an awful lot about your day-to-day, work and activity on the net. So truly, I love that one slide that said, be careful, email, it's bad, right?
Yeah.
Can be bad, right? So.
Yeah. But I guess that brings us to our next checkpoint, which is cyber insurance, which is one way of mitigating, right? I mean, in the accounting world, we often say, those risks you can't control, you insure against. That's how you mitigate them. But I think that when it comes to cyber insurance, there's still a bunch of potential risks that people aren't prepared for. And I guess what are the things that people need to know when it comes to cybersecurity? Obviously, I think some of the things we that look, that stand out are like, hey, what are the limits and sub limits? Am I covered retroactively, and what are the exclusions? Those are like the top three I think that everyone recognizes. But more and more, we're seeing some other issues with cybersecurity, like the fact that, hey, what happens when it comes time for renewal? Or what happens with, as far as your limits and sublimits and exclusions, like, what am I not doing now that I don't realize are going to effectively result in an exclusion because I signed up for my cybersecurity insurance the way many people install software, which is yes, 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 yes to everything, right?
That would be a mistake, Andrew.
That would be a mistake. Well, I remember when, I can tell you for us, the most interesting thing that I found out is, so when we went through our attack, we didn't have cybersecurity insurance because I thought errors and omissions covered me, not realizing it didn't. I'd been wrongfully told that your home insurance covers some cyber insurance in it, which it certainly didn't cover my business.
No.
And I was gobsmacked to hear that my governing body as a CPA here in Canada requires me to have errors and omissions insurance, but absolutely doesn't require me to have cyber. And in fact, the insurance provider that I use that's provided to me through my governing body and recommended to me through my governing body doesn't even offer cyber. So I couldn't go to my errors and omission and add cyber to it.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a great point. Depending upon the state, depending upon the company and size, and you may not be able to find cyber insurance, right? It's not just a given that you can just call somebody and say, hey, man, I want some cyber, right? And you brought up a great point. Do not just give it a wink and a nod when you're filling that stuff out, because if you do get hacked, you will not be covered if it's discovered.
Yeah.
And it's falsifying, records is what it comes down to. So there could be other risk associated with that. So.
Well, and how many times, insurance companies aren't keen on paying out, right? And not keen on paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars in a ransomware attack. And that's, so I can tell you that when we went through our attack, they wanted $250,000 out of me. And thankfully we didn't pay it. But if your insurance, if you have cyber and they're going to pay that, they're going to do everything they can to get out of paying that. And so they're going to go back and check whether you've done all the things that you said that you have done when you ticked all those boxes. And so what are the key things that, we've got 10 things to know before you purchase your cybersecurity insurance here up on the screen, which I think are helpful and useful. But I think, to me, I think there's a couple of key things that have stood out to me as far as things that a lot of people don't realize that they need to have, like their policies. Like they have to have those policy documents in place. They need to do, at least for us, we needed to have audits done. What are the things that you see that are normally the things that people need to continuously work on and do, like employee awareness and stuff like that, to maintain, their coverage with their existing cyber policies?
Yeah, so it goes along with 4557. So if you've read any of that publication, if you're, I'm sorry?
Sorry, that was
So-
my daughter
Oh,
interrupting me.
no
Sorry.
problem.
So it's
Um,
working from home. I
That's
wasn't
great.
calling you Daddy, Wes.
I'm like, what? um, really, not only do you need to have your policy written, cybersecurity policy written for your own company, and that doesn't mean just taking some template and putting your name on it, right? You really need to think about your own policy and how you operate and what you need to cover there. Policy, how are you going to empower that policy, right? Enforce it, because that'll be what's asked. Well, that's great that you said you were using multi-factor authentication, but you didn't use it.
But you didn't use it, absolutely.
So, you have to be doing what you say you're doing there. Vendor due diligence is another big part of that, right? So if you're using Jimmy Joe Bob's IT department and they have access to everything and that's where the breach came from, then did you do your due diligence on your vendors, right?
Right.
Protecting the data that you have. So they're going to want to know that. And then I'll call it recovery, right? Just to kind of shorten it down a little bit. Can you recover from that attack, i.e. backups? Are they protected? How often are you taking them? Where are they stored? Are they encrypted? So just if you do look at the publication 4557, gives you a really good short list there. We don't really have time to go through all that today, but
hopefully we can share that with people, because I think that's something that a lot of people aren't really familiar with, and they really need to be. Again, not to scare you, but to help you understand that these are things that you can be aware of. And I think from my perspective, the absolute key is working with a good MSP like Swissnet, who knows and understands these risks, so that you don't have to become an expert on 4557. Like, you just got Wes in your corner who's taking care of this for you.
Right, exactly.
And on that note, I'm actually I'm gonna move on a little bit quicker, because we got lots more content and only like 15 minutes left. So I'm gonna bring up our next poll here. So Kelly, if you want to drop that down for us, I'm curious to see how many firms have cybersecurity insurance right now. And again, be curious to see, even within those who do have it. I wonder if too bad we need almost a follow-up poll. How many people think that they would pay out based on what we just discussed, right, Wes?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to say that.
Definitely, you can put it in the chat if you don't have it, but now think that is a necessary expense for your business.
Yeah. And Wes, is there any cybersecurity companies that you like or that you found are good to work with out there?
Yeah, I mean, they're all that I actually was hoping to get to say this. Every single one of them that we've worked with, so without naming any names, we have no affiliation with anybody, but especially all the major ones that are out there, they do a fantastic job when you do get hit, right? They run the forensics, they take care of the communication, they take care of getting all the credit protection and everything else out there for your clients. So you get, well, we're kind of saying, hey, look, they could be sticklers about, making sure you tell them what you actually have and what you don't have. And it is, it's not cheap to get cybersecurity insurance anymore. But boy, let me tell you, what we've seen them actually step up and do, they have real experts that know how to deal with this. And they will be in your corner on it. So,
yeah, again, the companies I know that I talked to who went through it and had cyber insurance in place, they said the companies that they worked with were a dream. Like the insurance was great to work with. They provided them, all the resources that they need to go through the entire process, which includes having a hostage negotiator, believe it or not. It includes having an IT company.
right.
Even if you've got an MSP, you need a third-party IT company coming in and doing a separate assessment. Includes having the lawyers preparing all the documentation that goes out. And like you said, Wes, all these monitoring tools that you're going to want to provide as sort of, remediation to the people whose data may have been accessed. And what's interesting too is that it's almost like when it comes to a hack, it's like you have to be able to prove that they weren't able to access the information, not the other way around. You're not proving that the hacker got this piece of data. You have to prove that they didn't get it.
That's right. Yeah.
Which makes it all the more fun and costly.
I will say, just for the audience, if you guys want to, I think you have our emails and stuff. I'm happy to share some names with anybody. I just don't think this is the right forum to throw all that out.
That works for me, and yeah, I think that's a good idea, because hopefully this will be a bit evergreen, and who you love today, you may not love tomorrow. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So we do have quite a few people who have cyber, which is great, and that'll sort of bring us on to checkpoint number 4, the critical steps that you need to know to protect your firm, which I think there's some pretty obvious ones we've talked about already: data backups, password managers, multi-factor authentication, antivirus or endpoint discovery, firewall, encryption. One of the things I'd be curious to talk to you about is sort of on that encryption side. What is that common that you guys see a lot? Encryption at rest. I mean, encryption. We talked about HTTPS encryption in transit. That's obviously very common and pretty much the standard these days.
It is. Yeah.
What about encryption at rest? Is that, I see a lot of small businesses that aren't even familiar with that as a concept.
For our clients, both in the private cloud hosting and public cloud hosting, and really our policies internally and for most of our clients, we do full hard drive encryption on your end devices. So whether it's a Mac, an Android, an iPhone, a PC, you should have encryption on all of those devices. And not just at a file by file basis, but the entire drive, right? Especially if it's something that you can pick up and walk away from, right?
Mm-hmm. Like an external drive.
And that's really where encryption comes into play. Absolutely. Thumb drives, external drives, laptops, phones, they all should have encryption on.
But you're a security guy, so I get that everyone that you guys work with do. What's the norm in the real world, though? Is the average person encrypting their data? Because I'm not seeing it.
Actually, that's interesting that you say that. If you have an iPhone and you have a PIN on it, you've got it encrypted. You might not know that you've got it encrypted, but it's encrypted. Right. So depending upon what device you're talking about, most Macs and PCs, no, people are not encrypting their hard drives. So right. It's unfortunate, but they should be.
Yeah, and like a scarier thing to me is because those external hard drives are so cheap now, and because you're like now most new computers are going to be a solid state drive, which usually means smaller drives, which means external drives that people can walk away with, pick up, and so more and more, I think small businesses are exposing themselves with more and more risk with a drive that can just be picked up, walked out, and it's not encrypted, nothing.
Absolutely correct. Yep, we see that a lot. So encrypt everything is the general idea. The one thing that you didn't mention is email, right? So even if you're using a service or something that is encrypting everything in transit and special
like
encryption,
Proton Mail or something like that.
Yeah. Keep in mind when it's on your device, it may not be encrypted.
Right.
Right. So.
So again, that's encrypted in transit, not at rest, right?
Right. So we just always encourage everybody encrypt all hard drives, whether it's external, a thumb drive, solid state, whatever it might be. Make sure you get it encrypted. And at the speeds they run today, there's really no disadvantage.
Yeah, and that sort of brings up email and logically phishing attacks. What are the things that people can do to help mitigate and protect against phishing attacks? Because I think obviously we talked about education being an important and critical component. And then I guess is the next step having a really good EDR in place in case someone does click on something that they absolutely shouldn't?
Yeah, absolutely. EDR, don't run as admin. Make sure you're using multi-factor authentication in case you do give away your credentials, right?
Right.
But really the best bet is to be able to spot it when it comes in. One tip I'll just give everybody, if you get an email and you go, gee, what is that? You might want to stop and just stop right there.
Exactly. I mean, that you're just looking for behavior that's not consistent with the person that it's coming from. So I shared earlier that uh, I received an invitation from Brad Smith's mother on effectively through Instagram, or spoofed Instagram account, and it was her telling me about this amazing new government subsidy that I could get. And I'm going, why is Brad Smith's mother using government subsidies? That doesn't seem quite right.
Right,
You
exactly.
and that's really it, is I think going through and looking for things like typos and email addresses that aren't consistent with the body of the email, like who the sender is not like who the email says from, or the sender is, it looks like it's from Swissnet, but it's Swissnet123, right?
Right.
Or or some slight variation, which we've seen. So just having an eye for detail, which many people in the accounting and finance world do have, is sort of critical to avoiding those. And I guess when in doubt, my favorite thing to do is if I'm getting a link from someone and it's telling me to go somewhere, I'm going to look for a second way to get there. Like if this is coming ostensibly from my bank, or ostensibly from, someone who's expecting me to make a payment, I'm going to go in and log into that portal or to that system directly, rather than clicking on the link that it's purporting to come
Yeah.
from.
Andrew, I will say we have seen quite a few attacks against folks like CPAs, wealth managers, that actually are coming from legitimate client emails. It means the client has been hit.
Hacked. Yeah.
Yep.
And they don't know it.
And they don't know it, and they're trying to get you involved. So as difficult as that is, I will say, know your clients.
Yes. Yeah. And that's exactly it, is like it could be from a perfectly legitimate email address, but you have to know that the behavior is not consistent with what you would expect.
I did talk to an accountant though, and I thought it was kind of ironic when I made that comment to him. Well, you got to know your clients, and he goes, "Really? All 250 of them?"
Well, I've got over 600 of them,
Right.
but I still know the general behavior of what my clients is. I may
And
not be able to
that's
remember
the
every
point.
single one, but I
Right.
certainly know that my clients aren't going to be emailing me on my or calling me on my cell phone to ask me to send them a check. Right.
Right. Exactly. So,
Yeah.
protocols, right? What are your established protocols, and your clients should know that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I got some more reiteration on the 6 key points that I wanted to close with, which were on protecting yourself, or sort of data backups, password managers, antivirus, whether that's antivirus or EDR, firewalls. And we haven't spent too much time talking about firewalls. One thing that might be interesting to talk about is software firewalls versus physical firewalls. Do you have a preference on those? The difference between the two? Is hardware better than
No.
software?
Not necessarily. Depends on how they're used. We use them both. I personally use them both. I would encourage you to use your firewall. So if you're in your office or your home, if you think that modem that you got from Spectrum or Comcast or whoever it might be is adequate, it is not. You should have a firewall behind it.
Right, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And then again, also encryption we talked about earlier. And then the last point on number 6 to me is working with a reliable technology partner. I think that is absolutely key. Like having a guy like Wes in your corner because you're working with an organization like Swissnet is absolutely the key to this, because then you don't have to become the technology expert, right? Because you can count on Wes doing all the research and dealing with all the latest trends and, reading all the government reports and knowing what you need to do, and helping you take care of that. And it's just like we tell our clients, hey, like the reason you hire an accountant is so that you can work on your business. The reason you hire a technology partner like Swissnet is so that you can work on your business. Right?
Exactly right.
I'm going
I
to-
wouldn't touch my taxes
Sorry,
if I
guys.
had
I want to
to.
make
We
sure
gotta do
that
the
we
last
can
poll?
launch the last poll and give everyone time to answer. So I'm going to do that. You can obviously keep going. I just wanted to make sure that we got that on the screen. And I wanted to let you know that we had 2 questions in the Q&A. Do you want me
Absolutely. So why
to
don't
send
we-
those over?
I think we will launch the poll now, and then maybe we can answer those Q&A. I'll
Yeah.
try and pull them up right now.
So would you like more information from Swissnet to make your firm's tech stack more secure? Obviously, based on what you've heard today, there are a lot of ways that people can infiltrate your security systems. And I'm sure that the people at Swissnet would love to chat with you even just about what they offer and how they can help. So please, if you're curious, answer yes, and somebody will be reaching out to you. And then I'm going to skip over to the questions. The first one is, how much better is security with data hosting organizations targeted towards accountants like TaxDome for sensitive client documents or the companies that handle tax programs?
So I'm trying to make sure I understand this question fully.
Right.
So they're basically saying, how much better is security data hosting organizations when they're targeting stuff like TaxDome or other tax programs? Is there, I guess, do they level up their security when it comes to different, sensitive information?
This comes back to, I guess, when you're looking with any third party period, I think that there's an assumption that they are doing their due diligence. And I think one of the things that we're learning, Wes, is that you can't just trust that they're taking care of your data,
Right.
no matter who they are, no matter what they're targeting.
Yep.
You need to do a little bit of due diligence on who the provider is. And there are organizations out there that that do take, I'm a big fan of Citrix. Citrix ShareFile is one of the tools that we use for document storage. We know that they take their security seriously, but at the end of the day, it's also up to how I configure and set up that system, right? So it means having my MSP go in and make sure that that is set up and configured properly and done right, because there are insecure deployments of ShareFile and there are secure deployments of ShareFile, at least from my perspective. Wouldn't you agree, Wes?
Absolutely, I agree. One thing, the major providers out there will have.
Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you real quick because people probably have to jump off. We are at time. I'm going to let the room stay open. But if you do have to jump off, we totally appreciate that you joined us today. Thank you for coming. And again, you can reach out to Untitled Accountant if you need to get in touch with either Andrew or Wes, or if you have any questions. But Wes, go ahead, continue.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I probably got a little too wordy on some of these.
No,
but,
it's fine.
Every major provider out there will have a SOC of some sort. So SOC compliance, they'll have. So when you do your due diligence on a vendor, you're going to want to look at that, and you're going to want to look at what your responsibilities are, right? It will vary. So when you come to a provider, you can't just wash your hands and say, well, it's in their hands and it's good. And
Right.
it's your responsibility to make sure you understand what it is that particular vendor is expecting you to do when you configure it and set it up. I will say this, most of the providers out there, software as well as the data hosting companies, Swissnet included, spend literally millions of dollars every year to protect that data.
Yeah.
So,
and again, that's one of the advantages of working with them, but doesn't mean that you're completely absolved of doing your due diligence.
Absolutely.
correct.
Yeah.
And
then
one more question. I think this one would be for Wes. Moina or Monia, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. She says around 2 to 3 a.m. sometimes I've seen my modem and router are just going crazy and so bright that it lights up the room, and this concerns me. Should it concern me?
It would concern me.
Could it just be doing updates or something in the middle of the night? I know sometimes my cell phone updates when I plug it in, and it could just be pulling data, and maybe that's what's causing the lights.
It is. And so, what Is your device turned on? Is your computer on? Is it doing updates? And that's easy to check on your computer, right? When it's scheduled to do. So if it looks like it's kind of in that same time frame, I wouldn't be too concerned about it, especially at that time of the day. If it's consistent, then that tells me there's something that's running on a regular basis to do some kind of update or download or something. I would not think it was data exfiltration if that's not typically how a hacker would work, right?
Got it.
What are your thoughts on things like Glasswire or things like that to be able to monitor traffic on your network?
I like it, but keep in mind it will slow things down. And unless you know what you're looking for, you're probably wasting your money.
Right.
Okay. Wait, one more question.
I
Oh
think
no,
it just says
Wayne said
thanks.
thank you. So I'm gonna shut us down because we are over time. I want to thank you both, Andrew and Wes and Swissnet, for joining us today. Again, anyone that is still on the call, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Andrew, do you have a slide? Nope, just questions at the end. I wanted to make sure. So I know that you can find Andrew on Twitter and Facebook and all the things, and I'm sure that you can do the same for Wes and Swissnet. But we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry for being so wordy again.
No worries.
Thanks, Wes. Great chat with you again.
Take care. Bye-bye.